Hi everyone, this is Professor Lodato, and welcome back to another exciting day of English class. Today we're going to talk about critical reading and some best practices as you begin this course. I wanted to start with this quote from a book called What We See When We Read. The author says, "There's a story called reading. We all know this story. It's a story of pictures and picturing. The story of reading is a remembered story. When we read, we are immersed, and the more we are immersed, the less we are able, in the moment, to bring our analytical minds to bear upon the experience in which we are absorbed. Thus, when we discuss the feeling of reading, we are really talking about the memory of having read." Reading is a remarkable skill that only human beings have. It is the one thing that separates us from all other creatures on this earth, that we have the analytical mind to not only process information live as it's happening, but recall that we have the ability to do that and simultaneously do both, to take in and analyze the different situations in the text and recall past experiences. Reading, honestly, is an amazing thing. And why do we read? Well, when we read critically, we actually are opening ourselves up to new worlds. Your textbook says, critical reading involves looking beneath the surface of a text, seeking to understand the creator's intentions, the strategies for achieving them, and their effects. Those three are distinct parts about reading. It's knowing another human being very, very deeply to see their intention. It's understanding the skill and the craft that it took them to bring life to that intention. And third, it's the effect on you. I like the way James Baldwin says it. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, but then you read. He goes on to say, books taught me that the things that tormented me most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive and who had ever been alive. Now, that is the deepest level of reading, to connect one person to another through empathy. In order to achieve that highest level of reading, where there is that genuine human connection, though, you need to have the critical skills to see past just what's on the page. So this first skill is called active reading previewing. The very page itself can tell us something about the thing you're going to read without having read a word of it. So here are some of the things that we can do to preview what the author's intention might be and what the effects might be. The first is the title. The title of a piece kind of names it. It tells you what that piece is seeking to do. It could be a hook. It could be a main idea, like this example, I want a wife. It could tell you the theme of the piece. It could tell you the method being used or the subject. A title can do a lot of things, and a really good title can draw you further in to engaging with that particular piece of writing. You can also look at the author. What does the author's background reveal? If I'm reading a book on politics and it's from a journalist, that'll be different than if it was from a former politician. It'll kind of give me the angle of that story. Similarly, you might be able to look at the genre. What genre are you reading? Are you reading a comedic piece? Are you reading a piece of journalism? Are you reading page 6, like a gossip column? All of those are different types of things. The publication, where it is published, makes a giant difference. If you read something called The Creatures of the Dark Ocean, that's going to be very different if it's on the science fiction section of Barnes and Nobles versus in an academic article on squids. And then lastly, you want to look at the date published, especially if you're doing something that is timely, something like studying the news, looking at scientific research, looking at the latest medical data. If we were to look at medical data from 2019 versus 2020 versus 2028, way in the future, those years have very different circumstances. And I think we all can acknowledge that 2020 has had a lot of twists and turns. So the date 2020 will have the implications of the quarantine and the virus and all of the different things that have happened this year. So knowing that date will also make a difference in how we read the situation. Reading is a context sport. We like to tell ourselves that reading is like watching a movie. And this book, what we see when we read, is kind of replicating it as the big old silver screen. But what happens during reading isn't actually like a movie at all, right? Reading is something that we do, going back for a second, right? Reading isn't like a movie. It's actually very different. A movie is an entirely passive experience. It's something that we take in, right? Like right now, unfortunately, because we're not in class, this YouTube video, you're just watching it and not really interacting with me as a professor. I can ask you questions, but you're not going to be able to answer them because it's a one-way medium, right? But when we read, we're constantly interacting with the author and struggling to find out what he or she was seeking in their writing, looking at the imagery, calling to mind past text. All of those things are very active in our brain versus a movie. We're receiving information, and we might also look to other movies and other examples, but you're not being asked to analyze it in the same way as the interpretive mode of reading. Now, my favorite part. This word, I tell everybody it's annoying to an extent, but it's a really important word that I think helps us understand what reading is for. The word in ancient Greek is telos. So the telos is the end, purpose, or goal of something. Think of how we're framing this class, the hero's journey. Every hero's journey has an ending point. The hero is on a mission to do something. And once he or she accomplishes that telos, that end goal, the story is over. The movie ends, the credit rolls, the hero's kiss or whatever happens. But that's because it came to a natural telos, end point. Everything we do will be done purposefully in this class, and we're always thinking of the end goal. Our driving question is, what is my telos? You're here at CCM. What is your telos? Why are you here? Maybe it's to get a degree. Okay, why do you want a degree? Maybe to get a job. Okay, why do you want the job? Well, I want the job to have enough money to afford a house. Okay, what are you going to do with that house? Well, I'm going to fill it with my family. What are you going to do with your family? Well, I want to have a good life. At the end of the day, all these things we study are means to an end, but the man who termed this phrase or used it most famously is a philosopher named Aristotle. And Aristotle argued that the best end of life, right, the best purpose of our lives is to be comfortable thinking deep thoughts within ourselves and enjoying deep and intimate friendships in our lives. So that was the telos. The telos was everything else you do is to be right with yourself and your mind and your heart and your soul and to have good friendships. So each step in this hero's journey is a path towards those two goals. Going back to the skills we might need, one of them is annotation. So there's two different types of annotation here. One is actually writing on the page, and the second one is highlighting. Now, the reason we annotate is because we're interacting with the text. We're trying to put onto the paper or onto the computer some semblance of what we do in our brain when we're reading something. So when we're underlining and actually using our pen, we might put a little mark next to an idea. We might put a post-it note on it to say this is really good. We might write a question mark if we're confused by something. You can even vent your feelings. I had a great textbook in college where I read this story of Sir Lancelot. It was a medieval romance class. And it was a story of Sir Lancelot, and he keeps going into these different towns, and he's riding a cart, and it's supposed to be a shameful thing that he's riding in this cart. It was looked at as a very low class kind of thing to do, something for prisoners would ride in a cart. So every town he goes into, people are like, oh, he's riding in the cart, he's riding in the cart. And the guy who owned this book before me had little drawings, little curse words everywhere. Another time with the blanking cart. It was honestly the only part of that book I remember, but because that person was so honest and vented their feelings, it really did make it stand out. Now, the way a lot of us use college textbooks is to highlight things, right? And if we highlight things, it's important to keep in mind that if you highlight everything, you're really highlighting nothing. So it's only useful to highlight if you have a system in place. So perhaps you have different colors, and the different colors mean different things. A good way of thinking of it for a freshman in college might be, I'm going to highlight all the definitions are in yellow. All of the things I might potentially use as quotes for essays are in pink, and everything I don't really get, I'm going to put like a little red line next to so I know to go back there. Any system works as long as you have a system that works for you. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the different types of writing we'll see in this course. Like I said earlier in my last video, each part of this course is tailored around who you are. So I thought it would be helpful to look at a character who introduces us to himself in the very first sentence of his book. This is J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. The character's name is Holden Caulfield, but you wouldn't know that from just this first sentence, but you do know a lot about him. So if you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. Now, I love this first sentence because it tells you so much about this guy. We could look at the title, Catcher in the Rye, kind of mysterious, oblique, doesn't really do much for me personally. We could look at when it was written, actively previewing 1951, so that maybe tells you a little something. Do people often go around saying crap in 1951? Not in literature. In real life, probably, but in literature, not so much. So that tells you this kid's a little edgy. Look at the author, J.D. Salinger. He's not really well known in 1951. This is, he wrote a couple of short stories, but this is his major work. So we don't really get too much out of the preview, but look at what this speaker says. You kind of get a sense of his age. You know he's a young man, right? How do we know that? Well, we know that because of his diction, the words he chooses. We know that because this is a really long sentence with 7 or 8 commas in it, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. His mind is racing in between different parts. We know that he says he doesn't want to talk about it. And yet, what does he do for this 4 or 5 lines? Does nothing but talk about the thing he doesn't want to talk about. The best piece of advice I can give you as a reader is a good author has that telos in mind, the end, purpose, or goal. Stick with the first part of that definition. Look at the end of this sentence. I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. If I were to ask you, what is this book about? In some ways, it's about the truth and about a character who doesn't want to deal with it. Now, I'm going to skip forward well in time to a book that I read with my high schoolers just last year. This book is very similar in its beginning and very different in its style. That was pure prose. It's from 1951. This is a Jason Reynolds book called Long Way Down. It's written in the style of poetry. But I want you to notice there's some similarities between that character we just saw and the character here. Don't nobody believe nothing these days, which is why I haven't told nobody about the story I'm about to tell you. And the truth is, you probably ain't gonna believe it either. You're gonna think I was lying or I'm losing it. But I'm telling you, this story is true. It happened to me. Really. It did. It so did. My name is William Holloman. But to my friends and people who know me, just Will. So call me Will, because after what I tell you, what I'm about to tell you, you'll either want to be my friend or not want to be my friend at all. Either way, you'll know me. I'm only William to my mother and my brother Sean whenever he was trying to be funny. Now, I'm wishing I would have laughed more at his dumb jokes because the day before yesterday, Sean was shot and killed. We learn a lot about this character in the exposition of the story. We learn that his brother was shot and killed tragically. We learn his name. We learn a little bit about his personality. And we learn also that he's another young man going back and forth about wanting to tell you what the truth is. Two very different books with very different approaches to the exact same subject, the truth. Now, I give you that little bit of a preview because as we go forward in this course, you're going to be looking at texts like that and seeing they're nothing alike. And yet there's something very similar about them. Now, many of us probably don't have the life experience of either Holden Caulfield or Will. But each of us has some connection to those characters through our empathetic reading of the text. Now, we learned about previewing, we learned about annotating, interacting, and we've seen two different characters. The next step for you to be able to take in your own reading is to summarize. Now, summarizing can work for fiction like we just read. We could summarize what happens, but we miss a lot of the details. Summarizing is a very, very necessary skill for college overall, though. Right? Because summarizing is the ability to digest your reading in your own words and to tell someone the biggest takeaway from that reading. Summarizing is an easy way to understand a topic. You're trying to put it into your own words so you have some knowledge of it. Right? It also enables you to do that very, very highest form of teaching someone else. If you can teach someone else, that means you really, really must know that thing. So summarizing helps you get to that level. Things you need to summarize at the end of the day, you might want to summarize your notes for class. You might want to summarize what you just read. There's a great format called Cornell Notes where you not only take notes, but at the end of each page of notes, you write a brief one-sentence summary of it. That's a really helpful skill as you begin this college journey. And then we want to make the reading our own with critical thinking. Critical thinking is a process that involves a thoughtful, inquisitive judgment forming an examination of a text. There's many different types of critical thinking, and we're going to go through a lot of these as we go in the class. First is analysis. That would be to examine particular elements of a work. We might look at the thesis of an essay. We might look at the audience, who's it intended for. We might look at the evidence given in a body paragraph. Or we might look at the language. That's kind of what I was trying to model for you with Will and Holden. They both are young men. They both are writing this first person account. but the language is different enough that you can tell that they're from a modern era versus an older era. You can tell that they might be slightly different ages because Will sounds younger. That is breaking apart. That's analysis. We might also infer things. That's interpreting those underlying meanings of the elements and the assumptions that you make when reading. We can also synthesize, where analysis is to tear something apart. Synthesize is to bring disparate parts together and see the whole message. We will have our biggest essay of the semester is actually a synthesis essay. And lastly, we want to evaluate or judge something to determine the quality of it. That's also critical reading. Here's a little part from your book that I find very helpful on how to analyze an essay for meaning. Just be aware that there are multiple levels of meaning whenever you read. The two most explicit ones are the denotative meaning and the connotative meaning. So denotative is what is said. Connotative is what is implied. So you could think of it as the text itself and the subtext. Holden told us he didn't want to tell us the story, but everything else about that paragraph told you he really, really did want you to know that story. Right? The thesis is the main idea that a writer is trying to communicate. We will work a lot on thesis statements this semester. You're going to have to model thesis statements in every essay you write. Even a story has a thesis statement. I want you to think of the thesis statement as the telos. The telos is the thing you're trying to do. That's the purpose or the goal. So your thesis should be your telos. It should tell me what your end goal is for the paper. Usually you find a thesis if you're reading an essay in our book in the first one or two paragraphs, but sometimes it's much more subtle than that, especially in fiction, right? The author doesn't say, here is a story about a boy who lost his brother. And his dealing with the consequences of that. It's really revealed throughout the course of the story. When you're reading for a thesis, you're trying to figure out, what is this essay about? And the last thing I wanted to say on this slide, the purpose is the writer's apparent reason for writing. What was he or she trying to achieve? There's always a deeper meaning than just someone was told to write this for their English 111 class. You could write anything you want in this course. You have a lot of freedom. You have to write in a certain parameter. It's a type of essay. But with this hero's journey idea that you are the star of the show, when I tell you to write a narrative about something that has made you you, you have total choice in that. And what you say will definitely reflect your telos, what you're trying to develop about yourself this semester. I also just wanted to show you that there are a lot of different reasons why people write and a lot of different types of writing, right? So we might write to express something of ourselves or reflect on our own experiences. We might be writing to inform someone of something. We might be writing to evaluate or judge. We're writing just to explore an idea and not have an answer. Or we might be writing to actually propose a solution, to say, here's what's wrong and here's how you fix it. All of these are ways that we write in real life, and we also will write them in this class. I really want to emphasize that writing is the beginning of a conversation, right? All writing is an interaction between an author and a reader. I've read once a really good book that talked about writing as using baseball as a metaphor, right? The author is the pitcher and the reader is the catcher, and you don't necessarily know what's being thrown at you, but you know you have to make the right move to adapt and catch it. So a curveball is different than a fastball, right? And you as the catcher need to be able to, see the signal, right? See what's happening on the mound and then respond to it. The writer has a goal and must execute a certain strategy to achieve their aim and ultimately be successful. Writers make choices that influence the reader and strengthen their writing. So some of these choices are the type of writing, the type of essay, the language that they use, the publication they choose to put it in. And authors also have to make a bunch of other choices. And you, as an author in this course, are going to have to make these choices. Who are you writing for? Certainly don't just write for me, right? You don't even see me in person. This is, I'm the last person you want to write just explicitly to me alone. It should go beyond just your professor or whoever it is. You're writing for a broader audience. The method you're going to use, that is what this entire course syllabus lays out, different types of methods you have as a writer. What evidence will you use? What is the structure of your paper? And there's two different things that we try and emphasize with structure. We want to have unity, where everything relates back to the telos or the thesis. And we also want to have coherence, that everyone understands how these things sync up. You also have a lot of language choices. There's many ways of saying I love you, but the tone, the words you choose, and the images you choose can make all the difference. If I tell someone I love them like flies like garbage, that's not really a great love image. I could probably think of something a little bit more poetic and that has a less harsh tone than that. And that will make a big difference in my narrative essay especially. So next week in module number 2, you'll learn about the DIDS chart or the diddles chart, which talks about the different parts of voice. Now, here is one last piece of literature for today. This is a poem that I learned here at CCM, and I've carried with me my entire life. It's a short poem. It's perfect length to memorize if you're looking for a good poem. This is by a New Jersey poet, William Carlos Williams, and it's called This Is Just to Say. This is just to say, I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet and so cold. We could go through and use the skills that we learned earlier in this module to analyze the title, the time frame, the author, information we know. But let's just focus on what's actually in front of us. This poem is so short that structurally, it doesn't even look like a poem. What does it look like? I feel like I'm playing Dora the Explorer a little bit. What does it look like? And then you respond. And then Swiper comes in and I say, Swiper, no swiping. But what does it look like? It looks like a little note, right? Maybe one that you'd find on your fridge. And this is actually what the poem's about. It's about somebody coming over to the fridge, going to open the door, seeing this exact note that says what? That someone stole their breakfast. Someone stole all their plums. Is this person sorry they stole those plums? Let's look at the poem. Forgive me. They were delicious, so sweet and so cold. Now, you could write a very long paper analyzing this. And I've done it, and I've had students choose this poem as something to analyze because those last 4 lines really tell you a lot about the speaker. It tells you about the relationship between these two people. It tells you about the world that they inhabit. It builds out a relationship, a universe, a whole backstory to how the plums got there and why the person's eating them, but it's just 4 lines. You know that this person doesn't give a crap that they ate those plums. And they actually made a special point to make sure that the person knew they ate the plums, even though they knew that the other person didn't want to eat it or didn't want them to eat it. Analytically, you could interpret this as Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. I had a student once write an excellent analysis of this as a type of rape. I've had students write that this is like a brother and sister who are fighting, squabbling little kids. I've had people say this is what the moment before a divorce looks like. Now, none of that is in this text, but through our critical reading, as long as you can justify it, you can make a valid argument for any of those. And that's the power of what we're doing in this class, is learning how to use our skills to take even the most basic of a 12-line poem about plums and create a whole analysis about it. So I just offered you this little checklist from your textbook. I'm going to move past it. And I want to talk about how we respond to an essay. Now, you're actually going to be asked to do this quite immediately in this module because you have a quick write on the soul-affirming essay, the soul-crushing essay. So there's many ways to respond to an essay. First, you could agree or disagree with the author. Second, you could split the difference and say, I agree with the author on these points, but not on these. Third, you could explain how the author achieves a particular effect. So were they successful in reaching their telos? If they wanted to move you to tears, how did they do that? Did they do that well? And lastly, you can judge the overall effectiveness. Now, there's a really important one that's not on here, which is what I'm asking you to do in your quick write. I would like you to each relate what the author is saying in the essay to your own personal life. Again, that mindset of you being the hero of the story. So in Scott Korb's The Soul Crushing Student essay, he talks about how students forget that they have a part in the story, that they think they have nothing to offer the world except bland 5-paragraph essays on other people's writing. And he asks 2 key questions. One, he says, do students see themselves as peculiar? And peculiar doesn't mean something bad. It means something positive. It means that which makes you unique, right? Things that are peculiar about me might be my family background, my career, things I've read or watched over the years, things I do, hobbies, experiences, my relationships with family and friends. All of those things are peculiar to me. You might have things that make you peculiar. Maybe you're a parent. Maybe you are an immigrant. Maybe you are someone with a learning disability. Maybe you are someone who is going back to school after many years. Maybe you are a veteran. There's any number of different life experiences that you have that the person sitting next to you in class does not have. And one thing that we all have in common that's very peculiar is that we're all doing this online, perhaps very, very suddenly. So you're going to write 1 paragraph about what makes you peculiar, but interpret it as a positive, right? What unique means. Second part is what baffles you. Baffles is a wonderful word, right? It means confuse or astonish. It's kind of something that stuns you, something that you almost can't believe is true or can't believe happens. So what baffles you? Rather than just agree with the author or disagree with him about what baffles him or what's peculiar to him, I'm asking you to take that lens and turn it on yourself. What baffles you and what's peculiar about you? Now, I wanted to offer you this last slide as a helpful paragraph structure as you go into that quick write. All paragraphs have to have a set structure, right? They don't necessarily need the exact same structure every time, but this is a reliable format for something like a quick write where you know you will cover all your bases and everyone will understand what your paragraph's about. So a paragraph has to begin with some kind of opening topic topic sentence. So the topic sentence here would explain what you were arguing or explaining. If I'm writing a paragraph about what makes me peculiar, I might say the overarching theme that makes me peculiar. I see the world as a series of stories. That's the thing that's peculiar about me, maybe, right? Everything I give as an example will tie back to me seeing the world as a series of stories. Now, I'm going to introduce a specific idea from either the article I'm explaining or from my topic sentence. So if I see the world as a particular series of stories, I might talk about how that started with my love of movies, right? When I was little, I always watched all these movies, and that's what my love of storytelling is. If I tell you I love movies, you might ask me a question like, what's your favorite movie? Why do you like movies so much? Why did you get a degree in filmmaking, right? I could then cite a specific example of a movie I really, really loved and why that was the thing that drew me into this world of stories. For me, I'm going to say that movie is Hook. I've been thinking about that movie a lot lately, which is Robin Williams' Peter Pan from the early 90s. It's the first movie I ever saw in theaters, and I absolutely loved it, right? I can't just drop that bomb, oh, I love Hook, that's my favorite movie, and then not explain why. So when I explain why I picked that movie, I have to go back to my topic sentence. Why is Hook my favorite movie? Well, because it drew me into this world of stories. And how did it do that? Because it's these two different stories. It's the story of real world versus Never Never Land, and how the real world kind of becomes Never Never Land and vice versa. What you really are trying to do is create a very, very clear idea in your topic sentence of what you are talking about. What is it that makes you peculiar? And then introduce a specific subset of that idea, cite a specific example, and then explain how that example ties into the topic sentence. In a paragraph, I might have to do that 2 or 3 times, that middle part. And that's what I call ICE. It's you introduce an idea, you cite a specific example of it, and then you explain how that specific example ties back to the top of it, how it ties back to your thesis or to your topic sentence. If I do that 2 times in a row, I might come up with a second series of examples. I also loved reading when I was a child. That's different. It's still about stories, which is my topic sentence, but it's not movies. Movies and books are different, as we saw earlier in this presentation. So, if I have a topic sentence and then I have one set of ICE, introduce, cite, explain, and then a second set, introduce, cite, explain, I end the paragraph with a concluding sentence. That concluding sentence will probably be similar to the topic sentence, but it tells me something new. By the end of this paragraph, I've realized not only do I love stories, but I need stories to create meaning in my own life, right? I have such a deep love of storytelling that it has to become something of who I am, right? All of that is just an impromptu way of showing you that you need this kind of sandwich effect. Topic sentence and concluding sentence are similar. The introduce, cite, explain, introduce, cite, explain are to get you from this starting point to the point where you end. But it's kind of like a giant circle. You start in one place, you go all the way around this journey, and you wind up right back in that same place, but something's a little bit different. I'm going to leave that for next week to explain a little bit more, because that is actually the topic of next week is the story circle and how all characters, yourself included, begin in one place, go through a series of obstacles and changes and struggles and victories and setbacks, and end back where you began, but changed. And I'm going to say change for the better. It's been wonderful to teach all of you. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you in Module 2 next week. Have a good day.